A thing that is incredibly important within the realm of Dota is the stats that heroes are in possession of. How your hero starts out and advances by leveling dictates largely what you can and cannot do, so let's look over this concept a bit further. Present on all heroes, base stats form a very powerful foundation of your hero. The most notable thing a player has to take into account initially though is how diverse these base stats are on each hero of the roster. Most people do this to some extent on a subconscious level. If you frequent playing position 3 or 4 for an example, there's a good chance you've come to know how annoying it is to face off against something like an Ogre Magi, due to how tanky he is, even if you don't know the exact base stats he's rocking. Familiarizing yourself more in depth with the base stats of the many different heroes will have a slew of positive benefits to you as a player, regardless of what position you find yourself on. By knowing the values that you have compared to your enemy, you're able to a lot more knowingly trade blows, last hit and deny, because you'll know if you have the numbers advantage over your opponent or not, which is one of the many things that play a part when people talk about lane advantage between hero compositions. If you head into the Heroes tab in the Dota 2 client, you can go to any one hero in the roster and move to the last tab named About and see a much greater picture of just how fundamentally strong your character is at the start of the game. While it doesn't look like much, these stats shown off play a huge role at all stages of the game, since they dictate just how you can play your hero, but also potentially how it should be built based on what their initial stat kit offers. If we take Ursa as an example, we can see how his base attack is actually really bad, and his average stat increase per level is also quite lackluster. This doesn't mean the hero is bad at all, quite the contrary, but rather that he plays around his passive Fury Swipes to be his main source of damage output. If they randomly decided to increase the base damage on Ursa, it would very easily swing the hero completely over the fence balance wise. So in order to adjust for just how powerful Fury Swipes is as a passive, his base stats are very rough compared to most other carries. A thing that plays a huge part in the early laning stages of the game comes from a combination between your defense and your health mana stats. Some heroes start with abhorrently low armor and are easily thrown out of lane initially, while others boast an absurdly high defense, often paired with a very high starting base HP region. When you're playing your lane, make sure that you know what these defense and attack values are like. Dota 2 at its laning stage is very much a back and forth between last hitting, denying, but also trading blows. And knowing how good your hero is at it, and where strength in that department lies, will end up making all the difference. Besides the initial starting stats present on your hero, another thing a player is wise to remember is how their chosen character levels up in the stats department. This plays a particularly big role for a lot of core heroes, since their itemization is often a result of empowering their already great gains, or building around something they're lacking. As a good rule of thumb, most often heroes will have their highest attribute increase per level based on their main stat, although this isn't always the case. When it comes to the initial laning stage though, if your hero has a particularly big swing in their main stat, it also stands to reason that your base damage will go through the roof compared once the level is acquired. If we use Pugna as an example here, we can see that, while his base damage doesn't look like much, he has a whole 5.2 intelligence gain for every level he attains in the game, which is ridiculously high. Combine this with his attack animation and attack range, and as soon as you are a few levels into lane with Pugna, it makes sense that he becomes absolutely demonic to lane against when it comes to trading right clicks and connecting blows. This increase of stats throughout the game is also what causes some carries to feel better for farming than others. One thing is whether or not the hero itself comes equipped with an ability for farming creeps swiftly. But if they have a very high stat gain attached to them, killing creeps, even without a dedicated farming ability or item, can feel that much easier. This is often also why carry heroes can feel fairly brittle. Their strength gain tends to be on the lower side, which is exactly why Black King Bar is as an important item as it is. With your HP not being as great as other characters merely by leveling, you now have to protect it by increasing your stats and make sure spells can't quickly shut you down. If you just play the game at a normal pace, you will no doubt start to pick these things up bit by bit, because you'll get used to these various heroes and how they feel to lane against. But I really can't recommend doing your homework into these stats enough. If you found yourself losing against a certain hero, or there was a game where you felt like things were particularly rough, and you didn't feel like you could trade while doing the lane, try and take a look at what your opponent's base stats were compared to yours, both initially and after a few levels. By making use of this knowledge, it becomes that much easier to play in a disadvantageous lane and play it into your favor, since you'll now have to resort to alternative strategies, such as either more pulling or direct kills, over extended trades that leave you losing the numbers game. An interesting, if specific subject that I wanted to cover. Base stats are such a fundamentally interesting concept in Dota, because by adjusting them, heroes completely change how they feel to play, and it's often something Valve uses as a way of adjusting the balance within the game. If you like the content, I'd hugely appreciate a like and a follow. And as always, you are able to find me live at twitch.tv/fabkubashi. Study up and become a better player by doing so. Know when you have the advantage on the enemy and push it into a winning lane and subsequently a winning game. Best of luck.